time, because otherwise people are going to get squeezed towards the end. So, first of all, talking about HE retention, the school sector perspective, are Jed Lepinier, and Sarah Morrison from Liftoff. So I'm going to sit here because I'm going to kind of grab them if they go on for too long. So on you go, and Jez, go first.
Good afternoon. Some of my talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about aspiration and ambition. And we've also got to take into account the ambition of parents sometimes as well. And my mother wanted me to be a priest. And so I'll be able to tell her tonight that I was standing at a pulpit talking in a church. So that gets us off, my aspiration. Father Jed. More like. Firstly, I'd like to thank Christina, Gatit, Linda and the AQMeN team for their work in this report and hosting the event today. There's some good news here for Leaps and colleagues delivering SHEP across Scotland, and we welcome this report. It is timely, a timely piece of work as we await with interest the findings of the Commission on widening access. SHEP has been in operation for 5 years now, and by the measures set out for it by the Scottish Funding Council, it has been successful. Generally speaking, the remit was to raise progression to higher education in the 70+ schools involved, approximately a quarter of the Scottish state school sector. And for most of the schools, this has happened. More detail can be found in our annual reports if you'd like to know a little bit more about that side of things, and you can get those from us. We're happy enough to give them to you. Is that right, Sarah? You're happy enough? Yes, good, good. Or you could go to the Funding Council if you prefer. We hope this success really isn't a great surprise to anyone. SHEP is part of a strategy which includes outcome agreements, and the cooperation of the sector has been really helpful for us in many ways in achieving our objectives. Turning to the report, I would like to note that the title is Beyond Access to HE. So I would argue that we should acknowledge that there is a difference between the terms widening access and widening participation. I agree there are synergies, but they mean different things. And this report looks at the effect of participation from students who have taken part in the access programme, SHEP in our case. When we implement strategy, or in English, when we deliver the programme, our objective is to widen access to higher education, and is our aim also to widen participation. But often the terminology can become confused. For example, the Commission on Widening Access may understand its remit to be about widening access, as it says in the title, but it must inevitably consider the impacts of participation, and the recent interim report contained examples of case studies that were both. Excuse me a minute. This isn't splitting hairs, because both areas need to be considered strategically when we try to develop policy. Examples of what we could mean by widening participation could include considering what support students might require on entering university if they entered through an adjusted grades programme or a policy similarly. Mentoring, student experience programmes, additional academic considerations such as perhaps extra maths courses or bridging modules. And from the access side, preparing students for participation could include summer schools, residential programmes, advice and guidance, negotiation or academic skills or learning skills programmes, all of which are contained within the SHEP programme. In the recommendations for policy at the end of the report, there are 4 that focus either for support in schools through SHEP or at transition stages or in higher education. STEM subjects are also flagged as particularly challenging, so the recommendations cover both access and participation. Traditionally, widening access activity has contained a fair amount of activity and rhetoric which relates to raising aspiration, and I think that all SHEP teams will endorse that this is something we would naturally do as part of our programmes. But it is something that is notoriously difficult to measure, and many trees have been sacrificed to create evaluation forms which, in my opinion, have failed to do this on many occasions. As noted in the Commission on Widening Participation report, work by the Rowantree Foundation and others have found that with most young people, there is no lack of aspiration or ambition. It is the idea that those aspirations and ambitions cannot be met that must be challenged. If we have had experience of attending university, it is far easy to believe that our children will do the same. If you have or know virtually no one who has entered higher education and live in an environment where this doesn't happen, it's so much harder to envisage yourself meeting an ambition, a job goal, or a vocation that includes attending a university. As it is outside of your experience, and this has been known for a long time, this is not news. All the policy recommendations at the end of the report have a remit, but for me, the biggest one is the second one, which states that targeted academic support to students in low SES and PC groups should start from school and continue through the transition period, and goes on to talk about attainment in more detail. And I've long believed that raising expectation can only be done by raising attainment. For example, admissions policies can help you access a programme, but if the judgment is that the student needs an A in maths to cope with the level of activity, who do we help by lowering that? You maybe don't need A's in English or history or music for a STEM course, but unless there is a significant support built into the programme or built into a summer school, we might not be doing the student any favours. Maybe discuss. Although we could argue all day, it depends upon the student. So, I would like to begin a dialogue with researchers, practitioners, academics and partners about this recommendation, because for me it's the most important one. There are some schools where we know there are a high number of students from low-income background. These schools have very low progression to higher education. Some are regularly in single figures, others are in the low teens, and they have low attainment, and many of the students who attend these schools will live in the targeted SIMD neighbourhoods. All of these factors appear in HEI strategic documents and outcome agreements. It isn't all gloom, and in Wester Hales Education Centre, Craig Royston Community High School and Springburn Academy and other schools, we have seen some evidence that this can change. These schools, I believe, should be the first to receive targeted academic support, in my view, which is recommended in the recommendation. So how could we do this? Well, there's a whole number of ways I think we can do it, but firstly, we need some evidence. Let's look at what's working here and in elsewhere. Hopefully the Commission can bring some of this to the fore and some of it into focus. We could, for example, run academic support across S5 or S4 on Friday afternoons. We could perhaps offer summer school placements to S5 students in preparation for the returning to S6 to deliver, preparing into S6 to do more hires. Or we could deliver other academic programmes in the S5 summer break in that bridging year and help raise attainment in S6. We could make conditional offers to students in S5 and encourage students to take part in such programmes. SHEP could deliver academic skills programmes throughout the academic year, as Liftoff does. And HE staff could teach extra classes in the targeted schools. We could, as my colleague Barbara said to me at lunchtime, make these schools centres of excellence. So to conclude, focusing minds on how we can contribute to the aim of raising attainment is for me the greatest challenge for schools and all of us who are involved in widening access and widening participation. If all partners were to come together to discuss or even audit themselves widening access and widening participation activity, perhaps a strategy or policy could be developed where this aim is placed squarely at its heart. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to start with a true confession, and that is when Christina emailed to ask me to do this today, I emailed straight back and said, yes, of course I will, Christina, no problem. And then I read the brief. So there's clearly a lesson in there for me somewhere. So the first thing I have to say to this group is that what we don't have in Liftoff is any tracking data beyond first destination. And that's one of the issues that I want to address. It's a real problem for us. So I don't have any graphs to show you, but we have lots of information about first destination upon leaving school. The other thing I'd just like to say before I start is that really, the question arose immediately for me is what is HE, what is higher education when we're talking about it? And when we're talking about it in terms of the Schools for Higher Education programme, we're talking about anything from an HN at college upwards. So certainly the young people who left the Liftoff programme last year who achieved HE entry, actually 51% of them went on to an HN at college, and I believe those young people aren't featured in the data because you're looking at university entrance. Similarly, Aspire North had very high numbers too, which I think was 44%. So there's an awful lot of young people who are achieving HE entry but are not going straight into university. So we do have a deficit in that kind of tracking forward. We don't have that sort of information, and I'm particularly interested to know what happens to people from HN. Do they go on and articulate into university degrees? And similarly, for those young people who don't make HE, who perhaps start at a non-advanced course, it'd be really interesting if we could find a way of tracking them forward to see what happens to them ultimately. Excuse me. So while I'm going to focus today mostly on Liftoff, of course, you can understand why. I think it's really important before I start just to make it clear that everybody in the SHEP programmes delivers very similar work. And what I've tried to do is pull out some themes that we think are key to supporting those young people moving forward. But everything that I describe in terms of what Liftoff does is done in one way or another and mirrored in the other programmes as well. So first of all, in terms of our experience, just reflecting on what Jed said there, we don't really recognise a deficit in aspiration in the young people that we work with. The SHEP programmes work with well-defined cohorts, certainly Liftoff and Aspire North do. We work very closely with those young people, we get to know them well, and we haven't really ever experienced a deficit in aspiration. What we absolutely do experience is a deficit in confidence and understanding of what is going on in the world of higher education. There's real confusion in the young people that we work with around some of the systems and the perceived complexity of those systems, and in the language that higher education uses. And I think it's worth just pointing out that a lot of the time, the young people that we work with haven't yet understood the difference between college and university before we start adding layers of complexity around different pathways and routes. It's that basic, and sometimes I think it's quite important that we maybe try and remember that. Similarly, I think it's important to realise or to remember that for a lot of the young people that we work with, the social anxiety around making the transition is as big a part as any academic anxiety that they might have. It's that real concern about, am I going to fit in? Are people going to like me? Am I going to make friends? So a lot of what we do around that is to try and physically remove people, take them to an institution, mix them up with people from other schools. We have people in our residential who go into a flat spin because they have to stay in a bedroom by themselves. It's the first time they've had to do that. So I think sometimes you have to go right back down to the bottom to remember really what it feels like to be that age and some of these things that we're asking young people to do. I'm just showing you examples to try and give you a sense of the young people's voices themselves, which I hope would be useful. Okay, so the next thing is supporting attainment. Jed's already referenced this. This is our Lift-Off Learning Skills programme that Jed mentioned. And that is delivered by postgraduate students going into schools. And that is to try and enhance young people's learning skills for HE. But what we've found and what the schools are feeding back to us is they're actually performing better in their hires if they take part in that, because they're getting those learning skills under their belts. But I think that also enhances their application. So in a similar way to the LEAP Summer School, for example, Lift-Off Learning Skills is a much, much smaller thing, but it is actually a credit-rated qualification that people can add on to their UCAS form. So it's just giving them a slight edge in terms of if another candidate had the same hires, for example. So there's perhaps things that we can explore there as well. The information, advice and guidance is probably our bread and butter. It's one of the most important things that we do, and I think the most important thing for the SHEP programme nationally is that we are completely impartial about where young people go. And in terms of success, as far as we're concerned, it's about the young person making the best informed choice they possibly can and ending up in the right institution at the right level and the right subject for them, regardless of where that might be. Excuse me. In terms of information, advice and guidance, I'm just going to bang a well-worn drum for a moment. As far as I am concerned, we do not need more information. What we need is better navigation of the information for the young people. I think generating yet more information is possibly unhelpful. There is an awful lot of it out there, you may have noticed. And I think one of the most powerful things that SHEP can do is help young people to navigate and understand what all of it means, where to start, because there's such a vast amount of it, it's really difficult for them to get to the bottom of it. Similarly, a lot of the work that we do is one-to-one, so clearly there's an awful lot of outreach work. We hold big events, we do stuff in schools, but we all work one-to-one with pupils. So while, yes, there are a lot of themes that may be barriers to people from certain demographics and so on and so forth, everybody's an individual. So that one-to-one work is hugely labour-intensive, resource-intensive, but I think it's worth keeping doing because young people really get a lot from it. My team will go out and do, and then we'll follow that up with them. So they get a nudge a few weeks later saying, have you done that yet? If not, why not? And what can we do to help you? So the action planning with senior pupils, for example, is the work that we do as well. I put this slide up just to show that while most of the work is outreach, we do, over time, start to develop a trust in a relationship with the pupils, which means that they will start coming back to us to ask for information. Or if they're stuck with something. And as I say, I must stress that's SHEP across the board. That's certainly not just Lift-Off. But it's nice to see. But it's another thing that's very difficult for us to capture in terms of engagement with pupils. That's ad hoc. It just comes in. So how do we start to capture that? I can't really talk about the work of SHEP without talking about our students. They're absolutely crucial. And one of our students featured there is actually going to be speaking to you later. Sorry, Tiffany, I didn't tell you that there's a photograph of you going up. I don't have an awful lot to say about students because I think it's such sort of startling good sense that there's not an awful lot more to say. But for young people to encounter real students in higher education, perhaps who came from a similar background or a similar school to themselves, is incredibly powerful. And the message, of course, is if I can do it, so can you. And I managed to find some slides from other programmes there just to show that. Okay, so I suppose my main point really is that none of the above works particularly well unless there's a really solid, well-established relationship underneath it, and that's where I think SHEP is in a unique position. We don't come in, do an intervention and disappear off again. We're with young people right the way from S3 up to S6 and beyond if they need us. You have to have that sustained over time. There has to be a feeling that we are reliable and that we are trustworthy. And of course, the relationship should not just be with the young people, but it also has to be with parents, crucially, with schools, with partners, and for us as SHEP programmes nationally, between ourselves as well. I think the relationship is absolutely key, because underneath all of the data and all of the information, graphs and tables and so on, are real people with real issues, and I think it's incredibly important that we remember that. And finally, just referring back to what I said right at the start, I would like to address the question of how we identify success. Because if it isn't initial destination upon leaving school, it is incredibly difficult for us. But this is a real example of somebody who messaged us on Facebook just because she'd spotted the team in and about her college. She didn't leave school to a positive destination, actually. She was unemployed, straight from school, eventually went on to do a non-advanced course, but is now studying an HN with the aspiration to go on to a degree. And she's referencing Liftoff still as being part of the process for her. Now, I think that's a huge success, but I can't possibly report it anywhere. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much to both of you for kicking off the afternoon. And I think at this point, we're actually moving on to the Napier University two people, Katrina and Neil, who are going to speak next. So I think what's going to happen is that we're going through our speakers and then we're going to have a big panel thing at the end. I'm not sure, Fiona, whether we're going to have lots of chairs up here. You can maybe think about how to organise. Yes. Right, so thank you very much to both Neil and Katrina. Katrina, you're going to start. And the next topic is higher education retention. This is so important, isn't it? Because thinking about, you know, we've thought about the numbers, but what do we actually do about it? And that's what you're going to be talking about.
I am, and I'm going to give a very, once I clear my throat, a very practitioner-focused approach, which is going to be quite different from this morning. When there was all the questions going round this morning, hold on a second. Right, that's fair. Okay, when there was all the questions going round this morning about why students were leaving, I was kind of sitting going like this, because I didn't really want to preempt what I was going to say this afternoon. But part of what I'm going to go on and talk about in the next 10 minutes is some work I did when I was Student Retention Project Officer at Edinburgh Napier, and the reasons the students gave us when they came to speak to us for one-to-one interventions, and they're very different from the reasons that they're reporting through HESA, and I think that might be quite interesting for us to explore. Where's my button? And the other thing I should say is Neil, who's following me, is actually from Edinburgh University. Okay, so the role of Student Retention Advisor was a role that came into being in Napier in 2005. If you look at the graph that I've got up there, you can see the red line, which shows our non-continuation statistics as they were in 2005. Now, when I started, the 2004 data had just been reported, and I think we were sitting at about 90% withdrawal rates. So for us, the red line is a big success story. And as you can see, we've been sitting around about 9% for the last few years. Everything suggests that's the figure we're coming in at again this year. Obviously, we'd like it to be lower, but given where it was, it's a success story. I'm going to go on and talk about some of the institutional initiatives that were put into place to try and work on the retention and to really try and improve our statistics. But I do have to say that I think one of the big reasons those numbers came down was we did over that period move from a largely recruiting university to a selecting university, probably for the first time. And we think that's made an impact, although we would really love to believe it was all the other initiatives we put in. So my role as Student Retention Advisor started in 2005 in response to the 19% dropout rate. My role was to provide one-to-one impartial and confidential guidance. I was not looking to keep students in the institution. I was looking to ensure they had a positive outcome. So they walked out of Napier with their heads held high. They didn't get that deficit you can get if you leave feeling that you've failed. Whatever they moved on to, they were trying to take some positive message and a positive next step with them. That was really my role. It was a self-referral service, so students largely self-referred. They weren't normally sent to me. If they arrived via an academic, it was because the academic recommended that they come along to see us. Most of them self-referred from publicity around campus. The other major source was other students who'd come to see us. They would have a chat and say, go along and speak to the people in student support services, they'll have a chat with you. And there was a little bit of referral from academic staff, but predominantly it was from other professional services, so careers advisors, but also things like the Student Association. You can see the numbers for the service there held steady round about. The first 2 years we started, it took a wee bit of a while to get going, but then we moved between about 200 and 250 students most year. The dip in 2011 was when I was pulled on to do other things as well, and there was nobody else covering the service. So, speaking to these students in the impartial service, most of it was delivered via one-to-one interviews. And these are the reasons they gave me during the interviews. And I know Kitty and her project quite well, and I think we've talked about this quite often at the steering group meetings for Back on Course. No student or very few students ever came to me in a face-to-face interview and said there was one reason they were leaving university. It just didn't work like that. There was a whole basket of reasons that forced them towards this decision. I quantified the reasons. I can't say it was me that categorised them. It was based on interviews with them. It was qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis of a full post-interview. So there may have been some personal bias in it, but I really tried to keep the personal bias out. I would say of the students that came to see me between 2005 and 2012, it's been about 1,300 unique students that I spoke to. 91% had a university-related reason for thinking about changing or leaving their course. But these were not always negative reasons. A lot of them were talking to me about course changes. So I've started doing this course, but actually I've realised now I'm at university, there's a whole world of courses open to me that I didn't know about when I was at school or at college or coming in as a mature student. And since I've started, I thought, oh, that looks really interesting. That's what I'd really like to be studying. People who studied very vocationally based courses and after a year in a very vocationally based course said, actually, I thought I wanted to be a nurse. I really don't like people. Can I go and be a computer scientist instead? And the reverse of that, a few computing students who went, actually, I want to work with people. Can I go into nursing? And I think I was always more surprised by that one. A lot of students who'd applied to our creative industry courses and maybe not got on in initially, but were now there saying, actually, I couldn't get into journalism. I thought I could cope with business management, but you know what? I really, really want to be a journalist. How do I do that? So a lot of, I would say, positive reasons for looking at course changes. And I think what it really highlighted to me was potentially, and I've heard Jed speak about this before, that the lack of guidance they were potentially getting prior to coming to university and the importance of IAG for these young people when they're making their decisions. But also the courage it takes to come and say, actually, I've made a mistake, can I change? Perhaps the students who had been most misinformed were those that had been told by their mum and dad to go and study something because it was a good career. And that was a lot of school children from Widening access backgrounds. If you're going to go to university, accountancy, law. And then they were just like, oh. So mums and dads out there, stay away from it, really. I'm trying to remember that just now myself. As my son, I want him to be an engineer and he wants to be a musician. It's a struggle. So as you can see from that graph there, over 20% of them would cite a reason round about course changes. There was a lot round about I failed a module, I'm not attending, or I've not taken enough modules. This always never failed to amaze me that students could actually not sign up for enough modules and then halfway through trimester notice they were only attending 2 subjects a trimester instead of 3, but it did happen. From the family and personal reasons, somebody asked about funding and finance earlier, and sorry, I can't remember who it was. It was actually a tiny percentage of the students that came and spoke to me, 4% consistently over the years that I did the service that cited funding and finance as a reason for wanting to leave. We did a phone survey once of students that we made offers to places to, but who never matriculated with us. And finance figured far more highly in that particular survey as a reason for not coming to university in the first place. I'll not go through all these. This hasn't been split up. I've included international students, as you can see from the fact that English is a problem, figures highly. It was predominantly Scottish domiciled students, but interestingly, the gender of students using the service matched the institutional gender profile exactly. So men used the service equally as women, though they came for slightly different reasons. The male students were more likely to say they'd failed and they weren't attending. The female students were more likely to cite family personal issues such as caring responsibilities. We had a real spate of pregnant students at one point, pregnant nurses, that's a biggie. Is there anything else I want to say? Yes, the homesick and the isolated, about 5% of the students identified as feeling isolated or homesick, but actually a lot more of them, when you were speaking to them, you could feel that actually what they were missing was a sense of belonging. And I think that's something that's really important, especially in new universities, where even though our students are full-time in terms of the amount of time they register with us, actually they have huge family and work commitments out with the university. So I spent a bit longer on that than I intended to, but just following the discussions this morning. Our institutional response was the other thing that Christina asked me to talk about today. So Napier put in place a huge student retention project. There was 3 new posts. There was myself, a director of student retention, and a pastoral care advisor purely for our nursing students, as we had quite a high dropout from nursing. And it's quite a difficult course in terms of the students being in 45 weeks a year and out in placement for a third of this time. We also created a student retention steering group back in 2005, and that's still in existence today, and it's chaired by an assistant principal, has always been chaired by an assistant principal. And I think having somebody that senior involved in something like this makes a real difference. It's helped drive a lot of the initiatives through the institution. The good news is that a lot of the initiatives we brought in back in 2005 through to 2009 are now firmly embedded in the institution. So actually what the Student Retention Steering Group does now is we meet 6 times a year and we look at, basically look at the HESA and SFC non-continuation rates that we're going to report, and we look to see if there's any areas that are flagging up as having an issue. I won't run through this because I'm aware I've got to hand over to Neil, but just to bring out some of the big changes we made, we moved from 8 15 credit modules a year to 3 20 credit modules a trimester, so 6 20 credit modules a year, just to allow students to really engage with subjects in depth. And we also think they were suffering from assessment overload, so we really looked at trying to tie down the amount of assessment we were getting our students to undertake. We also looked at other bits of LTA practice. No first year course should have exams at the end of first trimester. We tried desperately, or we still try desperately, not to give any of our first year students exams just before they go and leave us for the first time. And part of what we did as well is we pulled our academic year forward, so we actually start early September, late August, so we get the first trimester completed by Christmas. So our students go away at Christmas having submitted all their coursework and sitting all their exams. What else do I want to speak about? In terms of the belonging, the integrating and the inspiring, really chiming with what Sarah said, there's something there about students needing to feel that they belong, that they fit in. Our head of student development and wellbeing sat in one school's induction sessions back in 2007 and just sat in one particular programme, in the induction programme for students. And at the end of 2 days, she realised that the students in the room had sat and listened to people talk for 2 days about the subject, but had not spoken to a single other student in the room. And I'm seeing more nods around the room than I would like to see for people recognising that as an induction process. So at that point, we made a commitment to say that every single new student, whether they be starting in first year or a direct entrant, would get some form of induction that included a heavy element of socialisation. So every new start at Napier gets a 2-hour workshop the first day that they come into the institution, immediately after they meet their programme leader, and it's really about socialisation. It's a little bit about academic culture, what the differences are between school or college and university, but also really it's predominantly about meeting other students in the class, and nobody should go out of one of these sessions without having spoken to 2 or 3 other students in the class. I know we've got one of our postgraduate students here today who might not recognise that. I think the postgraduate students get something slightly different, but a similar sense. And I think that's probably about as much as I really want to say. There was a huge programme there, and I could talk about it for hours. And if anybody would like to talk to me about it for hours, please come up and see me at the end of the day. And with that, I think I will hand over to Neil, who says he's going to supply the poetry to my tables. Is that?
That's what I said, but I didn't think you'd say it out loud. Okay.
I thought it was lovely. That's why I said it.
Okay, there we go. So, good afternoon, everybody. I was asked to look at 2 things. The difficulties that WP students may encounter, when on degree programmes, and what we might be doing to address those. So here we go, let's have a look. So these are some reflections of my own on those 2 points, perhaps based on the last decade or so of experience working in this area with regards to retention of WP students. So from my own view, I would suggest that it's rather a good idea to break these difficulties, as you were, into 3 unique categories. And the way I like to think of it, first of all, would be those internal things that the student might own. So those would be the dispositions and the experiences of the student. Okay? The next category would be those things that the student does not own, those that are external, and of course, we need to say nothing more than institutional habitus. And then thirdly, in a sense, the interaction between these 2 things. So the point where dispositions, experiences, and habitus interact or overlay, and we'll use the phrase, well, from North America, campus ecology, the ecological approach to this, and I'll address those 3 elements as we move on. So first of all, if we were to consider perhaps those dispositions and experiences of the student, and over the last decade or so, the ones that I've been aware of students reporting and discussing. And I would suggest these would be the ones, and in actual fact, it's not up there, gender would go right the way through all of this. So gender will exist in all of these. The first one I wanted to cover would be congruence, or in actual fact, perhaps more appropriately, incongruence. And this ties into exactly what Katrina was just talking about, which is the notion of belonging. And this idea of fit, and just the WP student feel that they fit with the institution, so they feel that they've developed a sense of belonging. It's quite interesting because I always ask large numbers of WP students when they start how they feel they would describe themselves. Would it be a member of academic school X, or would it be a member of the University of Edinburgh? And the vast majority, every single year, would suggest rather that they feel part of this amorphous institution that is the University of Edinburgh, rather than their academic school. And I think that's an interesting thing, perhaps, to consider as we move forward. Academic issues, of course, and they've been addressed obviously today already with regards to prior attainment of students, but also not necessarily just the very literal that things might be challenging, but how to challenge that. I think it's the development, perhaps more appropriately, of relevant learning habits, I think. I think that is perhaps the more subtle way to look at it. Health issues, of course, and I think that's something obviously that's very much owned by the institution, it's very, beg your pardon, by the individual, it's their own issue. When I say obligations, that sounds like they're forced upon you, but it's really the commitments that the individual has that lies out with the locus of the institution. So those things that are equally as important. Students do not eat, sleep and study. They exist, they have life. And we must not forget that that life also exists. So it be the mature student who may indeed have a family, be it the undergraduate student who's just left school who uses perhaps part of their student bursary as a way to support their family. These connections that they have, perhaps through babysitting they have to do, whatever it is, things that take place outside of campus that we might not see, but are of immense importance. And that, of course, as all of these overlap, we end up with time poverty and the notion that the things that perhaps we want students to be doing, to be engaging with, and I'll come on to address these shortly, they just maybe don't have that time to do it. And how do we address that? How do we give somebody time? Or rather, do we create it by removing other burdens? And the next part I wanted to address, because this is one of the themes that I come on to later on, I think it's really important to look at with regards to retention, is the notion of habitus, and from my own view, how important this is with regards to our institution here in Edinburgh and every institution that you might represent. And I know not everybody's, in fact, perhaps in some parts of the literature it's a little bit out of fashion, perhaps a little bit at the moment, but I strongly believe and I strongly see it. I'm quite sure most of you could evidence and see it. You know, is the education system really, as it says here, maintaining class order? And is curriculum biased in favour of middle-class students? Let's have a think about that. Let's analyse that. And is this now, as I'm talking about difficulties in affecting retention, are these things that we have to be a little bit more subtly aware of? And ultimately, from Diane Ray's work there in 2001, I think the culture of educational institutions is often, I think, mistakenly thought of that's just what habitus is, but actually it's a lot more than that. And I think she far more eloquently outlines it there. So we have these owned experiences and dispositions of the student that will affect retention, the institutional habitus, and then ultimately where we have this overlay, this campus ecology, and I think this is something that represents a far more sophisticated view of retention, where we look at a far more ecological approach. And I think that, well, of course we see, and I think Christina, you talked very much this morning about the first year student being at perhaps greater risk of discontinuation. I think we have to think in a more longitudinal sense, at what stage do we no longer think that, well, it's just the dispositions within the student that are to blame for this situation? When do we as institutions take responsibility for what is happening? And indeed of how we are assisting the development and the support and the nourishing of our students. We will probably take a lot of claim when they leave with wonderful degrees at the very end, but what about during that? I think that's something we have to perhaps consider, that larger ecological approach to thinking about retention. Because there's a strong suggestion, I would say, that in actual fact it's really rather biased, the reporting of retention, to those internal factors, those things that are to do with the individual. It's nothing to do with the institution. It's nothing to do with the fact that we haven't addressed campus ecology properly. It's actually to do with the individual it's owned. And even the reporting of it is biased in the first instance. So we're looking for something a lot more sophisticated there, I think, which, as we know, is difficult. But that shouldn't put us off under any means. So, let me give you a couple of examples as to how I'm involved here at the University of Edinburgh, addressing some of this to try to make things better. I think the first thing that I'm always conscious of, and this is done through one of my major interests, which is peer support, be that traditional peer assisted learning, or be that traditional peer mentoring, a dyadic relationship. I think the promotion of academic buoyancy, which is the thing that most students will have to deal with, resilience would be a step beyond that, but I think that's very important. And so we're very much involved with making sure that students understand that, of the navigating of everyday campus life, which of course is very much related to students. If I go back, I know he's terribly unfashionable a little bit, but we're doing the notion of the rules of the game, and that the WP student may not be totally aware of the rules of the game and how to navigate campus and to form these networks and ways forward. And in actual fact, what we have to do is to educate the students to make sure that they're aware of the rules of the game. And the first way that we can look at, if I recall work that George Koo has talked about an awful lot in the literature, which looks at high-impact activities. And the involvement with high-impact activities leading to a greater likelihood of retention and indeed success. And so if we think about the extra and co-curricular becoming even more important, not just for the notion of development of employability, but actually directly related to retention of students and success of students. So we are charged with making sure that our WP students are actively involved as much as can be possible with volunteering opportunities. And I'm very much involved with that, be it supporting WP initiatives or other community-based projects. It could be with regards to international experiences, which is another huge high-impact activity for students. And we have a program, a national leading program called Widening Horizons, which has fully funded WP students over the last 3 years and will continue again this year, to send students on fully funded international experiences, which, of course, when those students return, in a sense, we have to send them thousands of miles away for them to develop a local peer group and feel that they can then take part in volunteering, in representational roles on campus, in international experiences. And these kind of ideas of being directly involved in high-impact activities and that relationship to increase the likelihood of success and retention. And ultimately, actually, I would argue from my own experience is that through the peer networks that we will have through peer-assisted learning and peer support, I think one of the key things is actually that rather than the academic being the main focus, it's actually the rules of the game and supplementing the social and cultural capital that the individual might be more likely to lack. And I think that's key. I think that's key. But that's a lot more difficult to report on. And I think that sometimes means it's not something that's focused on. So these are perhaps more conceptual in nature and very difficult just to write down, but I think they're very, very important. A final comment I wanted to come upon was to draw on a paper from Bean from 1982. Well over 30 years older now. And I know you'll be laughing probably because you're more than aware of it. But he was frustrated, he says, with regards to, this is about 7 or so years after Tinto's first work on modelling this. And he suggested, he was so frustrated, we are obsessed with these 4 questions. What are the reasons that students depart HE institutions? Which students are likely to depart? What are the entry-level characteristics of students who are most likely to depart? And what effect are programs and services having on attrition? He said, we must move on from this. I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was really, really interesting in terms of what institutions are doing to ensure that students don't drop out. And I'm sure there's lots more that we would like to find out about what's going on at the moment. So, finally, we have Katrina Castle, who is from... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Tiffany Jeffrey from Abertay and Nicola Allardyce from Heriot Watt.
Okay. Hi, my name's Nicola. I went to Armdale Academy and Whitburn Academy because of subject choices. Leaps, it's Leaps that I've been involved with. They're like part of the SHEP. I was in 3rd year when we first came in contact. Before 3rd year, like my mum and dad hadn't went to university. I don't have any older siblings, so I really didn't have a clue about university. I thought that how it worked was you went to primary school, then secondary school, then college, then university, and that was just how it happened. But then in 3rd year, these people came into school and took us on a bus, and we ended up in a university. And I was just happy I was getting out of maths. And we were given a real student, and I was just surprised that it wasn't someone in a robe carrying books about. And we got to hear about what being a student was really like. Then in 4th, 5th and 6th year, we stayed in school, but they spoke to us, and the student was kind of like having a big brother or sister. The teachers at school, all I had heard about university, it was sort of just the pressure, and like you need really good grades to go to university, you need to go to university, get a good job. So it was kind of really just scary. But then when Leaps came in, they kind of took you through what it's actually like being a student, rather than you just get to university and that's all that matters. Then after I left school in 6th year, I went on to do the summer school programme, which I'm so grateful that I did. I'm just the kind of person that signs up to everything and then worries about it later. So once I went, it was actually one of the most rewarding things that I did that from. It was probably, I would say, an essential stepping stone from high school. It was the first time I had like properly experienced what it's like to be a student. It was just a taster, so I never felt stressed. It wasn't the sort of stress that I was like, if I don't do well here, there's going to be massive consequences. It sort of just, it forced me to make friends. Like when we first went in, we spoke to everyone. I didn't know anyone, but it was really relaxed because everyone sort of had the same ambitions. It wasn't like anyone was there to muck about or have a carry on. Everybody wanted to get the most out of it. So I really enjoyed doing that. I actually made friends there that we now all speak together, and one of the people I met, I now sit in lectures and stuff with him, which I would never have got if I hadn't done it. Also, through summer school, the studying and stuff, like you didn't properly know what it was like to be a studying student. I sort of expected you just went into classes and got spoke at all the time. I didn't know the bits about going into the library or juggling between 2 different totally classes, so that was good. Moving on from 6th year, when I went into university, Leaps came in again and were asking for volunteers. So I now volunteer with them. I've done since 2nd year, I'm now in my 3rd year. Going into schools, I like to I like to tell the students the things that I wish I had known. It's like being, like I said, being a big brother or sister. You don't get the same sort of information from your mum or dad. If they don't have a clue what university is, they'll tell you that it's good to go, but that's all the information you get. I like it's fun telling the stories of first year. They like to ask loads of questions like what it's like to live in halls, and I always say watch out, people don't steal your food. They like hearing things like that. They get a really positive reaction. It sort of gets them excited about it, which is what I felt Leaps did. I think my whole university experience would have been so different. I'm not even sure I would have went to university because I didn't really get the drive to do it. University just seemed to be for really intelligent people, and I thought that if you had to be super intelligent to go to university. I'm not saying that you don't have to be intelligent to go to university, but it's not like the most important thing. There's people there that are also there to enjoy themselves. It's not all serious. I'm not sure if there's much more to say. I'll pass you on to another student.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Jeffrey and I study at Abertay University. When I was 6, I was a looked after child, and that was up to the age of 18. But when I was a looked after child and I was at high school, my foster carer, my social worker, and my guidance teacher, they all pressured me into going to university, all to start with. But I knew for a fact I wouldn't have been able to do it because I never got taught how to cook, never got taught how to budget, and never got taught all the independent skills that you really should know for university, or even college if you live away from home. And it kind of got worse because my foster care decided to go on holiday twice in a row for my exams. So I had to live with someone who I had no idea, I've never met before, so I had to live with them for 2 weeks. And that was during my exams, and then during that time I actually had a college interview because I kind of forgot everyone else, and as soon as I heard about lift off, my guidance teacher actually signed me up for lift off. And they helped me a lot because they took me to different colleges, took me to different universities. I done the S4 campus visit, I done the one-to-one meetings with them, I done LOLs, lift off learning skills, and I went to the lift off residential as well, LO2S. And then, because obviously they took me to different universities, colleges, I knew similar what they were like. And then I went to Dundee College and I felt like I really fitted in. I just got that vibe. So I decided to apply to Dundee College, do a HNC, instead of going straight to university. And I knew for a fact I could get onto a university in the end, but I decided to take the easier route in, because I felt more comfortable that way. And I just felt like I'd done that without any support, because I knew for a fact if I told anyone, they would have tried to stop me. So I found that it was hard, but it was worth it. But in my opinion, most parents, they should support you in whatever you do. So they shouldn't be telling you, oh, you've got to do such and such at university. You've got to go straight to university. They should, if they don't know anything about it, leave you alone or leave it to people that know about it to actually talk to you about it. If they do know anything about it, then what they should do is talk to you about it and actually get in-depth information, and not just tell you and just try and tell you have to go straight to university, you have to study this. They have to kind of go through options with you, and I feel like that's important. But I never had that. And if it wasn't for lift off, I would not have actually realised that I could actually go to college and then go to university afterwards. And just make it easier for me. So in my opinion, it's just you can get there in the end, even if it takes longer. It's easier. And we were talking about success before, Some people might talk about success and getting your grades to go straight to university. But then if you drop out, that isn't success. To me, it is maybe not a failure, but people can describe that as a failure. To me, success is actually, even if you take the longer route, but get there in the end, that's success for me. So I actually feel like I achieved success even if I'd done it my way. I never done it the way other people want me to. So, and I just feel like that's important. And like when I went into respite carer, when my foster carers went away, I actually got more support from them, even though I stayed with them for 2 weeks. They taught me more over the 2 weeks than I ever got taught. They taught me how to budget, they taught me how to cook, they taught me how to clean. All the little simple things you should learn grown up. I got taught all of that in 2 weeks. And I went on to live with them when I was 16, and I got taught more than I should have. And eventually I went to stay in Kirkcaldy with supported lodgings. And then I moved to Dundee, and I felt more comfortable with that, because at least I knew exactly how to have this support myself. But if I stayed where I was before I went straight to university, I would have ended up dropping out. I would have ended up running out of money. I would not have been able to cook, nothing like that. And I think it's important for any university or college to kind of offer like the classes of simple cooking. So simple student meals, simple budgeting. I feel that's important because if I never got that help, then I would never be able to do it. But there is other people in my situation that, in the same situation as I was, that has no idea what to do. And everything bundles up, and they wouldn't have been able to manage it. So in my opinion, it's much better to have that support there. You have student services in all colleges and universities, but you don't have specific classes to tell you how to cook. You don't have specific classes on telling how to budget. I feel that's important for every university or college to have the opportunity there, even if it's just a collective one. But I feel that's really, really important for students to actually be offered. But yeah, if you have kids or that, don't try and force them to go to college or university. Don't try and force them to do a certain subject. If you don't know anything about it, don't talk. Leave it to people that actually know what they're talking about, and leave it up to the pupil to actually do what they feel is best for them. Because I done that on my own behalf because I had no support. But if I done what everyone else wanted me to do, I would have been a failure to myself. I would never have got to university. So that's my advice. So thank you for listening.
Well, it was really good hearing both of your stories, and I think there's lots to be learnt from your suggestions as well. So how are we going to do the panel now? Do you want everybody to come up? Okay, so do the previous speakers want to... I can go, actually. Oh, yeah.
Second part, maybe we focus on this afternoon. We already had questions, and of course we are very happy if there are other questions to answer, but we can sit here. So only
Are we going to have 6 chairs up here then? I mean 7 including me, but I'm quite happy to go if you don't.
So we might have room for 6 and then someone to use the lecture.
Yeah. Right.
of course we can reply to the messages, but I would say it would be best to use our time at the end to talk about this presentation. I think there is a lot we can say.
So can we have Katrina and Neil and also Jed and Sarah? So Katrina, would you mind standing there? Oh, there's one more chair. Neil, there is a chair. Oh, can you stand at the...
Totally slipped my mind to even talk about high flyers. I don't know what I didn't. Sat down and I was like, that was like...
Right. So it's been really good having these three different perspectives. People who are involved in leaps and lift-off, people who are actually the students themselves, obviously, that's very, very important. And the people who are trying to think about what needs to change in the universities, that's very, very important as well. And I think there's a lot more to explore from all those perspectives. So who would like to start with a comment or a question? Okay, Kathleen.
Want to hog. I guess this is aimed at Sarah and Jed. And Jed, you made a plea for academic attainment, or how we can support attainment in schools and the role that SHEP could have. And Sarah talked about the various interventions from S3 to S6, but in my mind that's far too late. We have youngsters in our communities that have lost a year before they start primary school and they never make it up. Now, I'm not suggesting you go back to working pre-primary, but I wonder if there's any scope with SHEP going forward, and we don't know the funding situation for SHEP going forward yet, whether there is scope to go further down the school. And also, I would suggest people look at Dundee University's report out in the last couple of weeks, talking about the failings of CFE at secondary level. Somebody has to hold the government to account, because it is impacting on attainment, and more importantly on student choice and lack of breadth in the curriculum. And all of that would be S1, S2 in terms of giving advice.
Okay. Thanks, Kathleen. I think I understand your point completely, and there's been an awful lot of research done over the years about how engagement with families and younger children is a crucial part of the picture, and I understand that example you're giving about people having lost a year of education already before they even get to primary school. So I quite agree that clearly there needs to be interventions earlier on, but whether that would be a SHEP intervention or not, I really don't know that I can answer that. While I think it's important that families and young children are supported, I think it's equally important that that doesn't fall off at the other end. So obviously it's a resource issue, and in terms of how the whole thing is funded, but certainly for the young people that we work with, there's still a need further up the school also, and that's certainly in my opinion, that's our specialist area. So I'm not denying for a moment there's not a need further down. But I'm not sure whether we're the right people to do it.
I think certainly in relation to the Commission, when we gave evidence and spoke to the Commission, there was a lot of talk from the Commission's end about starting earlier. And I think also when I was talking about a plea for, I think, really some coherence. We all start to come together and start looking at what is being delivered, because I think the money side of things may well be shrinking. But I think, for example, Neil's work that he does with primary schools out of West of Hales, I think that's something we need to sit down and think about, about how do we work together? How does this all tie in before they get as far as SHEP? And maybe SHEP could start certainly at S1 and S2. A lot of it's to do with resources, but I think there's an awful lot of activity going on in schools. Some of it is traditional or legacy-based, which, there might have been some kind of rationale at the start. But I think with this Commission reporting now, it's a good time for us to sit down and audit all the activity that is going on and see if we can bring it together. For example, the Children's University is operating in various parts of Scotland. There's not that many of us know exactly what's going on. I'm going to the graduation, I think, this weekend. I've signed up to that to find out a little bit more about that, what's going on there, because sometimes it's very easy to retreat into your silos and do your work because you've got your operational plan and off you go. And if you don't get your head up and look around, things are developing round about you that you're not particularly aware of. I think the other thing is, it would be interesting to know what our students on the panel felt about, what Nicola was saying about her understanding of how university worked as well from school. Did you, at a young age, did you think anything about?
Like in first and second year, I was like the people that I was friends with in first and second year changed when I went in third year, and in first and second year I probably wouldn't have even imagined myself going to university, because it wasn't cool in first and second year to aspire to go on to university. So if somebody had came in and maybe took us and said that and taught us like we did when we got to third year, maybe that would have changed some of the way my friends at the time thought about it.
Yeah, Linda.
Thank you. You've all spoken about the wonderful work that the support service, it was like LEAPS and SHEP and so on, and the support that you're giving to individual students. But one of you also mentioned this sort of idea that, well, it's up to the student to do, it's like blaming the student for failure. What kind of work are you doing with members of the academic staff in order to educate them in the problems that students may have, particularly this wider group of students who've had such different experiences from the traditional students that they might have expected to be teaching in the past? Is it something that you spoke about, Neil, about the institutional habitus? What are you doing to, get all this, the other academic staff in the university to understand that this is an issue?
Well, obviously it's not me by myself. That's a heck of a task. For most things that go wrong with an institution, you can blame institutional habitus in some way. I think the first thing to do is probably to identify the key members of staff who are most likely to have the contact on a more regular basis with students. The prime candidates here in our institution would be the personal tutor. So we have to make sure, first of all, if we do it incrementally, step by step, that our personal tutors are properly educated in the way that you suggested, I think. So, as we know that there can be inherent problems, because there are personal tutors who take that role as something that's very precious and important to them, and there are those who maybe not as much. So there's a challenge there of engagement as well, I think, with the whole issue. I think if you look at trying to have our students engage with what they're doing, we need to have a professionalism and engagement from staff as well, I think. So that's one group to work on. So when people are becoming personal tutors, that is done there. I think you could even go further back. It's part of the recruitment process, perhaps, that staff, when they're being recruited, are new members of staff, be they maybe from the postdoc way up, to junior lecturer in that sense. Could there be an element of it's part of the recruitment process that they must be aware, and there could be questions put to them on panels about these kind of things? I mean, it kind of takes, you have to really shake things up a little bit, but I think it's a long time to get. There's not a quick fix to sort that out, but I think there are some things like that could be done right now, and make a move on that to make a start. Those are the two areas I would think might be things that we could move on at the moment. And then you've got the whole staff population, of course, maybe staff who are teaching every so often. That's a difficult thing to reach, a bit more difficult than the other groups that we're talking about, but I certainly think maybe as part of the university teacher training that new members of staff to go on, there could be an element in there as well, with regards to not just understanding the pedagogy of how you teach, but understanding the class that you are teaching and the diversity of it. I think there's a good, strong possibility to look at that. Those would be my maybe top 3 ideas, I think, perhaps. I don't know what others would say.
What about the level of teaching? Because it is assumed, I think, at Edinburgh, that students will have done advanced hires or A-levels. Is it not? What about students coming in with hires, though, who haven't done advanced hires and A-levels, who we know are more likely to drop out?
How we would look at that, yeah? I think,
well, what do we do about the assumptions of the lecturers, about the academic level that students are at?
I think part of it is there are a number of institutions across the country, not many, who will start first year at level 8. We're one of them here in Edinburgh.
Yeah, well, that's what I was meaning.
And there aren't, but that isn't the case for all institutions. So
no, but we've got a problem
we do.
with dropout of the few students who get here from poorer backgrounds.
I think that they're more likely to get to.
They're not more likely to withdraw, I think, than the study showed. Yeah.
And I think if we're talking
so there
about...
isn't a problem with withdrawal.
If we're talking about levels, I mean, Christina this morning talked about the articulating students who are coming in with level 7 and level 8 qualifications with HNCs and Ds. So level-wise, they're that are more qualified than the students who are entering with hires, and still we see, though, an issue with regards to retention there. So I think to reduce it merely to an academic issue, I think, as I was addressing earlier, I think there are other things there, and part of that is the habitus that Linda refers to, and then the ecological approach, I think, which is a broader way to look at things.
I think just to pick up again on what Neil is talking about there, you know, in many other professions, updating continuous professional development is part of professionalism. And I still am aghast half the time at the lack of this happening, because exactly as you describe, if your role is to teach any group, whatever that cohort is, you have to know where they're coming from. You have to know about prior attainment. And not everybody has a big range of skill there, and you know, as you've said yourself. But I think those are some of the expectations that I think need to be brought into play. If we're going to have a much more joined up and coherent continuum of education, which we're all in the business of trying to make happen, this is what I mean about, you know, this kind of research or this kind of forum really influencing what policy is on this and what the expectation is. You need it coming at all places, because those gaps or those the lack of social capital or cultural capital will continue, I suspect. It's not something that's an absolute. But we have to get more people more tuned in to assessing that and, you know, contributing to redressing the balance, I think. So I think CPD and educational policy on that whole continuum would be good.
And I think that's more or less what I was trying to say. When you look at the recommendations of the report, a lot of them are about the bleeding between what is widening access and what is widening participation, and how you bridge that, and how you make those transitions. And there, you know, college qualifications that are already being taught in schools at S5 and S6, and I think that there's an area there for development which will, I don't know how it's going to be done, but I think it's an area which may help us raise attainment. I think that the period that I've kind of lighted at, really, because I think theoretically we could fit it in, is working in S5 with students and maybe working with universities, delivering activities maybe on Friday afternoons, or, you know, as we talked about, you know, making some schools like centres of excellence or whatever for more interaction with universities and colleges.
Hi there, just to contribute to this part of the conversation, I just want to, I sometimes feel like I'm on a retainer for the QAA, but just to remind colleagues in the room that these matters have been discussed through the QAA over the last sort of 10 years, and a very good enhancement theme back maybe 7 years ago was the first year experience, looking at the kind of the really important aspects of the first year and how students can be supported to make that transition effectively into higher education. And we've returned to that theme again just now. You know, the current enhancement theme is transitions, and we need to look and see what's coming out of that enhancement theme and check the website of the QAA. And then the second wee point was I also work at Edinburgh University, just to kind of mention some work we've been doing through the Student Enhancement Project, where we've been looking at, again, supporting students to make that transition into higher education. And one of the post holders we had was looking specifically at academic transitions. And it's really about how you get into the engine of an institution, how you get some very interesting small-scale research that member of staff has done. She's now based in our Centre for Academic Practice and Development. And so she's now involved in helping our lecturers think about the cohort of students that are in front of them in those very early stages as they enter the institution. And I think that kind of qualitative research can, you know, it's very good to see how it partners with quantitative research, and just the individual experience of those students is really helpful, I think, for academics when they're thinking about designing their very early stages of the curriculum, the first semester and so on.
Thank you, that's really helpful. We have a comment here, yeah.
Just one very quick comment to make. We talk about transitions, and it's been a really stimulating and interesting day, but we talk about transitions from one sector to another within our segregated sectors, and I just think it would be really of great value in the future to look for more opportunities where we can discuss transitions across the sectors, across the whole continuum there, because, you know, it doesn't really make sense to me otherwise.
points. Oh yeah, we have a point here. Excuse me, just over here.
Walter Patterson from Colleges Scotland. I just want to draw attention to some schemes that have been running with great success in transitions from further education colleges into HE using the Associate Student scheme. So the student begins to get familiar with the concept of the university and how it works. So it's more like your idea of getting to know what's the rules of the game and how does one behave and form networks and so on. So these arrangements are in place at the Robert Gordon University and Aberdeen College, Dundee College and Dundee University, and they work very well. So they may be worth looking at for others who are considering improvements on that line.
I was going to say they're also, I think they're in place right across the sector, because certainly we've got them with our local colleges, Queen Margaret University, Heriot Watts, and over the University West of Scotland, Strathclyde, Glasgow Cali. We're running the associate. Liz is just doing a really interesting piece of work, starting off shortly, evaluating the associate student project and the experience of associate students and comparing that with our students articulating through non-associate routes.
I think if I can just come in as well, regarding the school sector, I think you're absolutely right, and we're very well aware of the associate student schemes, and they're excellent. But I just refer back to the point that I made when I was giving my initial presentation about, in terms of when we're talking about young people who are still at school, all of those things are additional layers of complexity and confusion, and they don't understand them, they don't understand articulation. And as I said, we're trying very hard to get them to understand the differences between college and university. So when in terms of relating to young people at school, it's a different kind of approach, I think, that you need to take.
Robert Gordon University, we've extended our associate student approach to some senior phase pupils as well. So we've had that in place for a number of years for articulating students, but we're also running programmes after school for senior phase pupils, and they also get associate student status. And I think that has been a real benefit just in terms of feeling part of the environment. We don't try and overcomplicate that, but it's just about a sense of belonging to the institution and beginning to be able to take advantage of those opportunities prior to making that transition. So it's really about that transition. And also just to pick up earlier about the work with S1 and 2 pupils. We've got a good partnership with Aspire North in one of the schools in Aberdeen City, where the university are looking at engaging with S1s and 2s, and then they will become part of the SHEP group in S3 and 4, and then we'll work in partnership together again through S5 and 6. So that's a way of kind of bringing all that together, which I think it's in its pilot stage just now, but is proving to be successful.
Yeah, we have a comment over here.
Hi, I'm Neil Hudson from the Vet School in Edinburgh. I just wanted to come in on a couple of the points that Neil had made and the points from the floor about how academics can engage in this and becoming aware of the students that you're teaching. I think it's exciting times for us, in the uni here, and I don't want to be sort of banging the drum in terms of the party line, but I think now that we have the push for teaching being this unambiguous priority, as to quote the Vice Principal, at vet school level, we're getting many of our members of staff now are engaging through the IAD and places like that with the Higher Education Academy and getting fellowship status. And one of the key parts of that is engaging with the UK Professional Standards Framework, and key in that some of the guidelines are a knowledge of the diversity of the student base and that sort of thing. So more and more members of staff are getting involved in that. So I don't think we should be complacent, but I also think it's exciting times that members of staff are being actively nudged into that. And we're actually at the vet school bringing that down into the student body as well, that we have a certificate in veterinary medical education where we get our undergraduate students getting involved in teaching activities, and some of the ones that Neil will be very aware of our guys going into schools and doing workshops and that side of things, and we've got a small number of them engaging with the HEA at associate fellowship status as well. So I think if we start that continuum about respect and knowledge and of the diversity of the people that we're teaching, then that will bear fruit in the future.
Good to hear, actually. I wonder if I could just ask the students, Did you find that when you went to university that members of staff, academic staff, lecturers were approachable, you could talk to them if you had worries or concerns, you could make yourself known to them, as it were? Did you find that?
I haven't ever really felt like, I never felt like I couldn't. It's just not something that ever crossed your mind, especially in first year. My classes were so big and they were addressing so many people, it wasn't very personal. And so I would probably say no, that I didn't feel like they were that approachable. As much as they said, like, if there's any questions, come and see me, it didn't ever feel like I could go and talk to them about anything personal or any problems I was having.
I think that's a really interesting answer, because in some ways first year university teaching is not designed particularly to be student-centred. If you're going to a lecture with 200 students in, then you are anonymous pretty much, aren't you?
Yeah, and as I've moved up the school now, I'm in
Yeah.
third year, it feels maybe the opposite, because the lecturers might see us more as, now we're in third year, we're probably going to stick it out to the end, but as we're in first year, it was kind of like we're here to give you what we are supposed to, but we're not here for you to come up and speak to us because you probably won't be here next year.
Yeah, we know that first year are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
What about your experience?
Well, I went to college first and I found they were really approachable. The classes were smaller because I realised that I couldn't go from this really small class at school to a big massive class at university right at the start. I felt like I needed more one-to-one. So I think the smaller classes helped a lot. Because you can go up to them and talk to them and that without any difficulties. But I think the place to go if you have any academic, any situations at home, that's where student services come in. So that's where the special services that any college and universities offer. I felt like that was the place to go for any other thing. Any academic, I felt like it was approachable. I wasn't there for. I've actually just progressed on to third year of uni, so it wasn't. I wasn't there like Nicola was, like from first and second year, where it's impersonal. It's more personal in third year, like she said, because the classes are smaller. So I've went in the time where it was actually approachable. But I realised that the smaller classes actually helps because they've got less people to talk to as well. So if you try to go up to talk to a lecturer and there's 200 people in the class and everyone wants to go up and talk to them and they're busy, they're not always got the time to do it, kind of thing. So I found the smaller classes were far easier.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, we've got a comment here.
I just want to follow on from that briefly, and I think one thing that we sometimes forget to talk about or omit to talk about when we're talking about professional development of teaching staff or their awareness of equality and diversity is the fact that much of the teaching delivery, particularly in first and second year and particularly in the humanities, is by postgraduate students. So until we start to talk about how we train them and engage them with our student population and with the delivery of the teaching, then we are missing out on quite a big workforce or quite an important face for first and second year students, because they are very much the ones that are leading the smaller groups and delivering feedback and responding to emails about assessments. And they are the ones that kind of need that first bit of training or bit of awareness in how to deal with that. I think it's a really interesting point that Neil raised about first years mostly identifying as part of the University of Edinburgh in general. And I wonder if that continues into third year, because in the honours years, you're much more based in your academic school and you've much more interaction with the academics. Whereas in first year and second year, you can quite often be a little bit more removed. And those people are really, really key in the kind of overall academic and student experience.
Important point that I don't think has been thought about very much, but it's good for you to raise it. There's one point over here.
Thanks. I think building on all those points, we've got an opportunity to feed into the development of the Teaching Excellence Framework, which I know is an English or a non-Scottish institution, but is likely to come here. And if widening participation is included in that, we can start to say, well, what are you doing for a diverse cohort? I heard Les Ebden speak recently, who's the director of Offer in England, and he was saying that very point, that can you claim to be excellent at teaching if only a certain kind of student succeeds on your programme? So there's an opportunity, I think, as a sector to really say, well, consider widening participation and retention within the TEF.
Yeah. I mean, are there any final points that anybody wants to make? Were you about to raise your hand or not? Anybody else? No? Oh yeah, there's a point here.
Very quick point, which has really just popped into my head following what Nicola was saying. But I was just thinking about one of our academics at Queen Margaret who was saying that in first year he starts with a class of 30, and then because of articulating students, in third year his class is 70, which is the exact opposite, I think, of what we've just said. He probably has more of a challenge engaging with his students in third year, and maybe that reflects on the withdrawal rate of articulating students because of the habitus and sense of belonging that they might not be able to get entering at third year into a class size which is more than double what they started with.
Right. Well, I think this is probably the point where we should pull things together. I found today really, really interesting. I think that the format of finding out about the research in the morning and then having all these diverse perspectives in the afternoon has worked really well, because we haven't got too much sucked up into the abstractions. We've always been thinking about what these things mean in practice. The other thing for me is that this has been a very positive day, because it definitely is not all gloom and doom. We've recognised the things that are going well in the Scottish and UK systems in terms of having a system that is growing in terms of participation, in terms of diversity, and actually continues to have high rates of completion, which is actually very, very good, the best in Europe. I think it's worth, we would know if we were the worst in Europe, so we might as well know when we're the best in Europe. So all these things are very positive, but it's also the case clearly that we've got a very long way to go, possibly particularly in some institutions, because in Napier, for example, you've had to think for some time about problems with high rates of student dropout, boys doing engineering who suddenly get there and think, God, I didn't know you had to do maths to do this, you know. But so you've dealt with that over a long period of time. I would say that in some other institutions, we've been thinking about it in a more concerted way more recently, actually. And so we clearly have lots to learn. Different parts of the sector have to learn from each other, and there is work to do in schools, and very important to get student feedback all the time, because unless you are finding it good and beneficial and getting better over time, then it's not really working. So it's really good that you've been able to tell us from your point of view what has been helpful for you, but also some of the things that could have been improved. So can I finish off by thanking very much Christina, Geeta, and I know Linda was involved in the research as well, and also the AQMeN team, Fiona, and the other people from AQMeN who've done such a fantastic job. The people who've been doing all the, you know, the filming, the lighting, the sound, it's all worked really, really well. And it is a beautiful venue as well. I think it's worth saying that. So thank you all very much. Thank you to the SFC for funding the research. That's very important too. Yes.